The conscience can be altered by argument. Conscience still has two meanings. It can mean A, the pressure a man feels upon his will to do what he thinks is right. B, his judgment as to what the content of right and wrong are. People may be mistaken about wrong and right. Most people in some degree are mistaken. By what means are mistakes in this field to be corrected? The most useful analogy here is that of reason, by which I do not mean some separate faculty, but, once more, the whole man judging, only judging this time not about good and evil, but about truth and falsehood. Now, any concrete train of reasoning involves three elements. Firstly, there is the reception of facts to reason about. These facts are received either from our own senses or from the report of other minds. That is, either experience or authority supplies us with our material. But each man's experience is so limited that the second source is the more usual. Of every 100 facts upon which to reason, 99 depend on authority. Secondly, there is the direct, simple act of the mind perceiving self-evident truth, as when we see that if A and B both equal C, then they equal each other. This act I call intuition. Thirdly, there is an art or skill of arranging the facts so as to yield a series of such intuitions which, linked together, produce a proof of the truth or falsehood of the proposition we are considering. Thus, in a geometrical proof, each step is seen by intuition, and to fail to see it is not to be a bad geometrician, but an idiot. The skill comes in arranging the material into a series of intuitable steps. Failure to do this does not mean idiocy, but only lack of ingenuity or invention. Failure to follow it need not mean idiocy, but either inattention or defect of memory which forbids us to hold all the intuitions together. Now, all corrections of errors in reasoning is really correction of the first or the third element. The second, the intuitional element, cannot be corrected if it is wrong, nor supplied if it is lacking. You can give the man new facts. You can invent a simpler proof, that is, a simple concatenation of intuitable truths. But when you come to an absolute inability to see any one of the self-evident steps out of which the proof is built, then you can do nothing. No doubt this absolute inability is much rarer than we suppose. Every teacher knows that people are constantly protesting that they can't see some self-evident inference. But the supposed inability is usually a refusal to see, resulting either from some passion which wants not to see the truth in question, or else from sloth, which does not want to think at all. But when the inability is real, argument is at an end. You cannot produce rational intuition by argument, because argument depends upon rational intuition. A proof rests upon the unprovable, which has to be just seen. Hence, faulty intuition is incorrigible. It does not follow that it cannot be trained by practice in attention and in the mortification of disturbing passions, or corrupted by the opposite habits. But it is not amenable to correction by argument.
Should we ignore our Democrat friends who don't care to look at facts? No point in trying to convince them when they turn a blind eye to vote cheating. I mean, I can understand it. I can understand why you wouldn't want to deal with the discomfort of being called names and, being called a racist and conspiracy theorist. And, they're like, oh, provide me with sources, and you send links. And like, I don't believe any of these sources. Send me New York Times or CNN. And of course they're not going to talk about it. So, how do you debate with people who refuse to look at evidence if it's not reported in the handful of institutions they've chosen to believe in, when the institutions they've chosen to believe in are not telling them the truth?
Before leaving the subject of reason, I must point out that authority not only combines with experience to produce the raw material, the facts, but also has to be frequently used instead of reasoning itself as a method of getting conclusions. For example, few of us have followed the reasoning on which even 10% of the truths we believe are based. We accept them on authority from the experts, and are wise to do so. For though we are thereby sometimes deceived, yet we should have to live like savages if we did not.
To what extent our nature is enlightened or unenlightened. Envision human figures living in an underground cave with a long entrance across the whole width of the cave. Here they've been from their childhood and have their legs and necks chained so that they cannot move and can only see before them, being prevented by the chains from turning their heads around. Above and behind them, a fire is blazing at a distance. They see only their own shadows, which the fire throws on the opposite wall of the cave. Of the objects which are being carried in like manner, they would only see the shadows. And if they were able to converse with one another, would they not suppose that they were naming what was actually before them?
How do you deal with a situation like that? I think it's very difficult. Personally, though, I would advise against abandoning people in that regard. He relayed to me the story of the prodigal son from the Bible, and I found it very interesting, his take on it, which was essentially there was this father who was very well off, and one of the sons decided to cash in his lot, said, "Father, give me all my wealth. I want to go, I'm out. I'm going to go enjoy life." He spends it on prostitutes and indulgence and gambling. His dishonest life leads to his ruin. And finally, he comes crawling back to his father, basically saying, "Let me be a servant." What happens? The father embraces him, accepts him back. This is a lesson, of course, within the Christian system of the idea of forgiveness and of repentance. And I think, but ties into a deeper principle that no matter how far off a person goes, there's always hope for them. No matter how bad a person becomes, there's always hope for them. That we should, as good people, not abandon people. That as good people, we should not abandon hope in people. I think the collapse of dialectic, traditional dialectic, like the ability of opposites to discuss, is the collapse of social harmony. Is the collapse of the systems that allow people of different ideas and beliefs to have a functioning society. I think we should maintain these lanes of communication, even if we don't agree, and even if that person does not treat us in a way we would like. I agree it's very difficult, but I would not recommend ignoring or abandoning people.
And when he remembered his old habitation and what was the wisdom of the cave and his fellow prisoners, do you not suppose that he would bless himself for the change? And if anyone tried to release another and lead him up to the light, let them only catch the offender, and they would put him to death. It is the task of the enlightened not only to ascend to learning and to see the good, but to be willing to descend again to those prisoners and to share their troubles and their honors, whether they are worth having or not. And this they must do, even with the prospect of death.